There are three things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and an outpour of conservative hysteria every time a TV show or film is released that spotlights any minority characters and/or includes a female lead with backup male characters. Because for all the proclaimed sensitivity and idiocy of the woke mob, woke agendas, wokeism, the woke mind virus, conservatives do sure have a tendency to completely lose their minds over something as inoffensive as diversity. Like when Ben Shapiro filmed himself burning Barbie dolls because of how much of a feminist dumpster fire the movie was. Or bemoaning the inclusion of a cartoon character in the animated film A Strange World because apparently children shouldn't know gay people exist. Or more recent examples of the new Snow White film, of conservatives hopping on the hate train again, not just because it's a bad movie, but yes, feminism. Ultra girl boss, says the esteemed 21st century thinker and grown man, Matt Walsh. And I'm not trying to be reductive here, it's just that's what a lot of these online lash-outs amount to. There is no semblance, no hint of artistic or philosophical criticism or any attempt at critical thinking laid out in these challenges. Only conservatives brandishing their wounded sense of privilege and trying to limit the scope of cinema to lending screen time to the identities and classes they're a part of or deem to be important. Then the other day I see this, Piers Morgan and other guests talking about the new hit Netflix miniseries Adolescence, a show that speaks to the perils of social media, radicalization, bigotry, and toxic masculinity, except Piers Morgan and his panel jump through endless hoops to try and boil down all this complexity and thematic analysis to just more feminist nonsense. And this was the nail in the coffin. Remember, to the right-wing conservative, art has no inherent value. It is only purposeful insofar as it becomes a political accessory that they can then put into their ideological toolkit. I mean, they literally have peddled entire culture wars over identity politics, the real issues of the world today, and begging the timeless question, what is a woman? An issue more pressing to them than the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Or so it seems, and a question that has been answered numerous times over, that will continue to be ignored because at the end of the day it's just conservative dog whistles. Then there's the worst of them all, the critical drinker, because while other conservatives have the excuse of lacking any media literacy, the Critical Drinkers channel is literally built on film criticism, or so it says. Because it's easy to spew negativity and have it be conflated for real thought-provoking criticism when it only pretends to have any depth. A guy who repeatedly goes on tirades about why modern movies suck, continuing to ride the coattails of the conservative grift. But let's just put this notion to bed quickly. If you can confidently say that you've watched a lot of movies made in recent years, and that on the whole come to the conclusion that modern movies just suck, something Tarantino also says, a director who I have a lot of respect for, but just think he's flat out wrong in that assertion, then you're either blinded by nostalgia or biases, don't actually believe what you're saying, or you actually just don't watch that many movies. I mean, it's completely disingenuous to say modern movies suck, because what are you even basing that on? Because frankly, this is an opinion that should not be taken seriously. Because it's just flat out delusion to say that there aren't any good movies being made anymore. In fact, I would go to say that in the last few years, movies have not just been decent, but pretty freaking good. 2024, we had Dune Part 2, Challenges, The Substance, The Brutalist, Anora, Nosferatu, Mad Max Furiosa. Then in 2023, we had The Hype Train of Barbenheimer, The Zone of Interest, Killers of the Flower Moon, Godzilla Minus One, The Anatomy of a Fall. And then 2022, The Batman, Top Gun Maverick, Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Northman, Banshees of Inisherin. And I can go on and on and on. Tell me all those movies suck with a straight face, and you're just outing yourself. The Critical Drinker's message can be summed up as follows.
The message. Female empowerment message about girls learning the value of their own potential. What none of us expected was 114 minutes of spiteful, bitter, mean-spirited, borderline unhinged hatred of men and everything even vaguely associated with them. No particular arc or personality in minds. And then the chief diversity officer decided they needed more representation, so they threw in a random black lady who has absolutely no reason to be there and contributes nothing to the story. 2. Oh yeah, and somehow Garrett, Henry's sister, and some random black lady also get pulled in with them. But the rest of the cast are mostly forgettable. Henry makes no impression as the protagonist, his sister isn't developed enough to care about, and although random black lady isn't nearly as annoying as you might think from the trailer, she really doesn't have much reason to be there either. The traditional heroic male lead that was pretty much the bedrock foundation of cinema for almost 100 years is apparently no longer a viable commodity in entertainment today. They're too dated, too toxic, too dangerous to put into the limelight, and so they've been replaced with more acceptable alternatives.
And don't you love that he shows you a picture of Robert Pattinson, Timothy Chalamet, Lakeith Stanfield, A-list actors? Like, the mere image of these guys is supposed to evoke a visceral reaction of disgust inside of you. Because to the critical drinker, the age-old male stoic archetype is the only archetype of masculinity, and anything outside of that is woke, because that's all masculinity is. And it is emasculating for these guys to see examples of men that are comfortable in their own skin without fitting the cliché stereotype of masculinity, because it impedes on their fragile sense of manhood. The irony. Times have changed, man. Men are no longer defined by hard exteriors, their physical stature and emotional indifference, because they realize they're much more than these flat cliches. But on a different note, if your criteria for a good movie are just the typical tropes of any mainstream action film, then there are plenty of those out there. The idea that competent male characters have just been written out of cinema is completely unfounded and also ridiculous. While some of the critical drinker's challenges might apply in certain instances, it is limited to just that. What he does is take a small set of films that may or may not meet his criteria and then generalizes it to be a larger trend in cinema. And while he might be able to give examples of the kinds of films he's talking about, I could give you hundreds more in response. What is this dichotomy between conservatives and modern art? Well, to restate the obvious, they don't care about the art itself, only its ability to reinforce their own worldviews. That's why most of their critiques end up being shallow, bad faith, rage-bait commentaries, because they've already made up their mind about a film beforehand. They use identity politics as a scapegoat to sidestep any actually meaningful critique. If a movie has a racially diverse cast, a female lead, or any LGBTQ+ characters, then it's woke propaganda. They frame all divergence from traditional tropes as an attack on real storytelling, as if films haven't always reflected the politics of their time, which is always fluctuating. This is merely a symptom of a nostalgic idealism these right-wing grifters have about a time period that simply better suited their politics. And it's on that basis they appreciate so-called real storytelling. The funny thing is that these grifters will get upset at forced representation, but then completely ignore the dominance hierarchy of the old Hollywood that was the epitome of their critique, where it was almost exclusively white male leads, but obviously that wasn't an issue. Even though there were actors at the time from other races who'd have had far better acting chops for certain roles had they actually been given any chance. And now, even when white male actors are still at the pinnacle of this dominance hierarchy in Hollywood, they perceive the mere existence of diversity as a threat to their cultural hegemony. This isn't even about the value dichotomy between conservatives and modern art, because in that sense, conservatives can still provide artistic reviews. No, it's purely motivated by a political agenda. The irony of which lies in their accusation of libtards and the woke mob as being the agenda-driven masses, when they themselves are doing the thing they are supposedly against. To the point where if a bad movie comes along, they will say it's good, because it promotes their own ideology. They aren't actually engaging with the art, but instead filtering it through the framework of a culture war. It's not about real storytelling. It's just tribalism. They paint themselves as the true counterculture, subverting the dominant woke left's infiltration of the arts, as if conservatives don't have a grip on the entire structure of online media and aren't also simultaneously funded by most media conglomerates. While the arts are usually a seat of cultural hegemony for leftists, there is not a dogmatic admonishing of art that doesn't fall in line with left-wing politics the way it sometimes is on the right. That's why many films from the past which exist in contrast to leftist ideals are still nonetheless admired for its artistic qualities, because of the understanding that while art is not apolitical, it can sometimes transcend the binary constraints of politics. Contrary to popular belief, leftists are not against masculinity, just the toxic manifestations of it. Take a look at The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, a film that epitomizes the strong, silent type that conservatives claim is disappearing, that is hardly progressive in its implications, but is still nonetheless critically acclaimed from all sides of the political spectrum because of its thrilling filmmaking and character work. Because leftists typically do not dismiss art in vain of their own politics, or due to the mere representation of contrasting ideologies, but instead partake in the discourse surrounding it rather than calling for its suppression. They see art not as blankets for moral absolutism, but as a reflection of the world at times, even if it goes against leftist ideals. But these insights don't generate the clicks or engagement that is characteristic of much of conservative media, so they just don't bother. and in lieu of their absence in the domain of art, they resort to sensationalist fabrications to drive viewership and engagement in light of their assumed victimization. And it works because they often cater to those who feel lonely, bitter, or hard done by one way or the other by assimilating their frustrations through a united common enemy. This low resolution discourse is so tiresome at this point, and hopefully, eventually, it changes for the better. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.